I'm not sure we're there yet on a widespread scale. And I don't know anybody that can show evidence that it's there.
That's Jared Wareham, my guest here today, addressing the question I asked him on herd rebuilding. Just one of the topics that we're going to discuss today as we look ahead into 2026. And of course, we'll be talking herd rebuilding, cattle markets, imports, exports, all that kind of stuff, ranch management and technology, but not rehashing the same talking points. Instead, we dig into what's actually influencing decisions at the ranch level, what's holding expansion back, and how producers like you and I can think about positioning ourselves for the year ahead.
I think cost of capital is key right now. I mean, operating expenses, they're really not softening. So cost of capital is going to be huge.
It's a wide angle conversation on markets, management, technology, and positioning ourselves for the coming year on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you to the first episode of 2026 of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. This is episode 239, and thank you for joining us here on the program. A great show in store for you today that I hope will help you as you put your minds and thoughts together for the year ahead for us. We're going to get to that in just a few moments. But before we do that, hey, do you have the latest issue of Working Ranch Magazine? Yeah, it's the February, in fact, issue that's out. I haven't quite got through it just yet, but when I first got it, I opened it up, and lo and behold, it was about the 30th WRCA World Championship Ranch Rodeo that took place. It was last fall, but a great write-up and articles, stories, and pictures of that particular event. Of course, a lot of great stories always featured in every issue of Working Ranch Magazine that are extremely relevant to those of us here in the ranching industry. Speaking of that, a lot of bull sales coming up, and a lot of those are featured in this issue and upcoming issues as well. So if you want to kind of be attuned to what's coming up on the bull sale production calendar, pay attention there. And speaking of upcoming bull sales, I want to note this: Schaff Angus Valley having their 123rd production sale. That's coming up on Saturday, January 31st. That's the end of this month. Mark the new date on that for Schaff Angus Valley. Again, that's Saturday, January 31st there at the ranch at St. Anthony, North Dakota. That's just south of Bismarck, man, down about 30 miles or so. But 10 a.m. Central Time for Schaff Angus Valley, selling about 550 head of registered bulls and females in that sale. Now, if you do want a catalog, you can go to their website at schaffangusvalley.com and you can download brochures, sale catalog, whatever you'd like to do. You can also give them a call if you have any questions on anything coming up. But don't forget to mark the 31st of January for Schaff Angus Valley sale. Quick tease of what's coming up on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Are we, as commercial cowmen, leaving money on the table in our bull and our breeding program that we have for our commercial cows? Jared Boardman, he's a fellow Wyoming rancher, is going to be joining me for that conversation. It was something that he and I talked about maybe 6-8 months ago. And I said, I think this would be a great discussion for the show. So we're going to be talking about that. So be sure to tune in on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, let's turn towards our subject at hand here today. Joining us on the program is Jared Wareham. He is a beef industry consultant and an ag tech consultant. He and his family ranch in southern Colorado. And Jared, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
You bet, Justin. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation. And of course, we've been talking a little bit over the last few months, and so it's finally here, and really enjoyed the opportunity to engage you today.
Well, our conversation, as you had said, we just kind of met over the phone a few months ago and just kind of talking back and forth. And I said, man, I enjoy the conversation because as we look at today, our specific topic is just kind of a broad topic of, well, let's look ahead into 2026 in our ranching industry, and what are some of the things that we're anticipating. And as you and I were kind of just back and forth in our phone conversations, I mean, there was a lot of good conversation that I felt would be valuable for other folks to just basically hear you and I, and for lack of better words, we'll use a beef term, ruminate on some subjects, on some topics here today. And as you and I were prepping for today's show, I said, I want to start with some of the topic that's maybe a little bit more obvious, definitely more on our top of our mind right now. And then I want to work through and talk about some things maybe we're not really thinking as much about, but is also affecting our beef industry, especially as we look ahead into 2026. So to address the first thing, which is on the top of everybody's mind, is the cattle market. And of course, there's a lot of different subtopics that we can get into within that. But definitely as we head into 2026, we're still seeing these prices continuing to be very, very strong and anticipating to look strong into 2026.
Yeah, I agree. I think the beef market in general and all those dynamics and elements that fall underneath that umbrella are the 800-pound gorilla in the room that everybody wants to know what's 26 look like, what's 27 look like. If we have any kind of preview to, I guess, thank goodness that the Superior sale, the bell ringer, was going on the last 2 days, because boy, that was price discovery right ahead of this conversation. And man, they were red hot. I mean, it was going to cost you $2,800 plus or minus that a little bit to buy a yearling delivered sometime in the next 3 months. And so I think the market's strong. Now, of course, we haven't closed the plant yet. We haven't scaled back Amarillo. That'll have some impact. We don't probably know yet what the magnitude of that is, but man, our national supplies are still so tight. Cow herd's small. We're getting some assistance there that we've never had before as far as larger carcasses and beef volume. That's maybe higher quality from that beef dairy space. But otherwise, I mean, those supplies domestically here are you can't grow them overnight, no matter what, Trump does, good or bad. I think there's a whole other conversation there that we'll definitely stay away from. But I think regardless of the import conversations, most of that beef is grind and going into the hamburger market within our beef system. And I think that's what we'll expect. There is some middle meat stuff that is coming in from some other countries as they begin to do a better job making better quality beef. But I still think that's marginal compared to what clearly we're in control of our own destiny here when it comes to beef supplies and the quality of what we're doing. So I think we can go down any rabbit hole you want to on that topic. And I think there's plenty of them. But I would say, as long as there's fewer cattle than there was a year ago, and I don't know if there's any definite stat out there that shows it, but it looks like this is the smallest calf crop. 2026 should be the smallest calf crop. I don't think it was 2025. So if 2026 is in fact the smallest calf crop that we've seen yet, then I think we're set to continue to just have unbelievably good supply demand fundamentals for the rancher.
Yeah.
And so I think that's clear. What other things could happen? The one that we teased out and we're curious about, that was an announcement that probably flew a little under the radar, was that Cargill acquisition of teas in Australia. That's an interesting one and one to watch for the future and what that might do for global supply chains within that system. So
yeah. So that kind of was leading me down this question I was getting ready to ask you, and that is, because of where our numbers are at here in the United States, what kind of doors is it opening in foreign markets? Not only, and I realize some of our biggest competitors in terms of global beef supply would be Brazil and Australia, or some other countries in South America, maybe possibly as well. So when we look at those, because of our domestic supply being so low, what is it allowing those countries to do?
Boy, that's an excellent question. I'm going to preface this by saying I am not a classically trained macroeconomist or economist.
Well, and again, we're just ruminating. It's you and I just kind of ruminating over the coffee here.
So if I'm talking from my position of just experience in the industry over the last 2.5 decades or so, I think what I see, and I've worked internationally a fair amount the last few years, specifically Australia and New Zealand quite a bit. I think there's a handful of things. Yes, we don't export a lot of product. We do, but we don't. I mean, we consume a lot of it here. We have a huge population and a huge population that loves beef, which is great. So our inability to maybe grow our footprint to, globally is an outcome of lower cow numbers. This is a tricky one because it can be a little chicken and the egg thing, because there's a lot of countries that love high quality meat when they have it, the CAB quality stuff. No doubt that once they have it, they really want to upgrade and come up to that level of quality in their diet, however much they can afford in that household. But there's a lot of portions of the global economy and that don't really have that exposure and experience yet. And so a lot of the Brazilian beef probably fits that market a little better than our beef. And so I'm not trying to just say, hey, we just need to back out of it. It's just fundamentally, they may be a better fit at present than we are. I think the view I have that's actually a little different than that is I think Australia is right there with us as far as beef quality, and a very large percent of their cow herd. And they have a lot of cows, but their actual domestic population isn't that big. And so they export 80% of their product. There's a lot of cow meat that comes in from Australia that goes into grind here, but they've done an outstanding job with genetics. Wagyu, they're kind of the OGs when it comes to Wagyu genetics, and their Angus population is tremendous. And so the quality of beef that they can produce is up there with ours, to be honest with you. They don't have quite the same kind of feeding capacity. I mean, they don't feed as much, in the same style. They don't have a lot of grain feeding. They do have some, but it's a little different. New Zealand would be a downgrade from that feeding system, but genetics, they can still produce some pretty good quality beef. A lot of it's beef dairy. And both of those countries, I think, prior to the tariff situation, because of our low cow numbers, were absolutely licking their chops, thinking, man, this is our opportunity to grow our footprint in the United States because our quality of our product is on tier or on par with what most average U.S. producers can create, and our supplies are tight. And so therefore the opportunity to grow that footprint with their domestic product into our market was there until the tariff thing kind of, I don't want to say it slammed the door shut, but it made that opportunity from their standpoint a little better. So we want to look at tariffs as a bad thing sometimes, but it's also a good thing, because I personally feel if they weren't there, I think the opportunity to bring more of that beef from the Australia, New Zealand regions into the U.S. marketplace would be there. I think they'd be growing their footprint substantially. They're already growing it, and I think they're still going to, regardless of the tariffs. But I think the restrictor plate would have been off a little more than it is now. So from my standpoint, I think that's what I see more so than are we losing market share to Brazil because they can fill a need where we can't? Maybe, but some of the need they're filling or market space they're filling isn't necessarily the same kind of customer that we're going to typically want to go after.
Yeah. I want to go back to one thing, and that was, you had talked about Cargill's investment in Australia in the beef deal there. Real quick, just explain what that was, what that segment of that market was, or what they're doing there.
Yeah, you bet. They acquired Tees, which is a chunk of a supply chain that exists there in Australia, from some packing capacity as well as feeding capacity. They would be very similar in their feeding capacity as far as their feeding systems to us, to the U.S. style of cattle feeding. A lot of really good high quality cattle go through Tees. I've been, in some of their systems down there in Australia, so they do know what they're doing. They do produce very good beef and beef dairy crosses. And my assumption is Cargill's possibly enhancing their supply chain so they can bring in some of that better quality beef in the form of cow meat for grind, but also potentially in the form of middle meats because of where we currently are, right? I mean, the packer is at a disadvantage today because the numbers of cattle available for them to procure and put into the box beef it's a challenge. They're tight. They're very tight. And so if U.S. demand holds from the consumer side, then it would be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out, because I'm not sure what the impact of tariffs would be if they own the supply chain and they're bringing it in themselves. Yeah. So was that a savvy move on their part to, one, help facilitate lowering the impact of the price crunch that we're under at their level, and at the same time growing their global footprint? I don't know. Maybe it was. It's interesting. That's one worth watching. It really kind of, when Tyson closed those plants, I think that's what most people were focused on and kind of missed that. That was, to me, a very interesting one. That'll be, we should watch it over the next couple of years, because that could be a move that pays off for them.
Okay. All right. Let's take a break here. One of the other subjects that definitely is talked about in the last few years, we continue to talk about it, is herd rebuilding. I want to get into that next, because I think within that, there's even some things that's not really being talked about or thought about in some ways, just on a broad level. Maybe internally, some folks are thinking about it. I want to air those comments out when we come back after the break. Okay. This segment today brought to you by Ambrook. And here's a question for everyone to think about. How many of us are making 6 six-figure decisions without really knowing which part of your operation is really making you money. And as we just talked about a little bit ago, if you're in the cow-calf business or the cattle industry right now, a lot of us are definitely making six-figure decisions. So when you're looking at your different enterprises, maybe you have a cow-calf enterprise, or maybe a backgrounding or haying or custom grazing, and then you throw family partnerships in all that, spreadsheets and QuickBooks just are not going to show true profitability or keep inventory straight easily. Ambrook gives you real-time enterprise-level clarity. Cost per head, per acre, or per enterprise, plus ag-specific inventory management for feed, inputs, and livestock. In fact, you can tag transactions right from the convenience of your phone, get same-day balance sheets, and instantly see what's profitable and what's bleeding you dry. So if you want to try Ambrook for 1 month, here's what you can do. You can go to their website at ambrook.com/ranch. Again, that's Ambrook, AMBROOK.com/ranch.
Your herd needs protein. When the seasons shift, so do your herd's protein needs. SmartLick protein tubs deliver consistent nutrition that drives performance, helping cattle make the most of available forages, maintain condition and power through winter efficiently, giving you peace of mind. Feed smarter, not harder. Go to smartlick.com, that's smartlic.com, to find your dealer.
All right, Jared, as we continue on, and again, the overarching theme of our discussion here today is looking ahead into 2026. And while I know we're going to be talking on some generally here so far subjects that everybody's have also been in their conversation mindset, I also want to try to expose some things maybe we aren't quite thinking about as well. I want to talk about the herd rebuilding, as you had prefaced in the last segment, potentially looking at this last year being one of our lowest calf crops in a long, long time. And so with that in mind, when we start looking at this herd rebuilding, the question is, when is that going to take place? Who is going to be doing that? And then a side conversation we can touch on a little bit is, how does the dairy play into some of this? So when we talk about rebuilding, give me your thoughts on that, of just to identify some things maybe we're not really thinking through.
Yeah, I think everybody's really studying that hard. A lot of the beef economists are searching for any kind of markers or benchmarks to and obviously fed, heifer on feed data and all those things are important data sets to examine. But I tell you, it doesn't seem to be happening. I mean, I think there's pockets of it, but I can tell you, people in the livestock marketing space are going to know when it happens before anybody else does. They're going to know who's keeping heifers and who didn't bring them to town this year. They're going to know who traded heifers over the video, and those heifers were purchased by somebody who's going to be developing heifers and not feeding them. I'm not sure we're there yet on a widespread scale, and I don't know anybody that can show evidence that it's there. And I kind of wonder where we're at as far as some of the other dynamics that may be holding it back. I mean, the age of the average rancher has always been up there, but labor is much harder than it's ever been to get. We always battle that. Labor is something that never gets talked about enough, unless you're, at the coffee shop or riding a tractor on auto steer and talking to your friend about not being able to find anybody that's worth a darn. But I tell you, when you're getting $2,000, $2,800 for wean calf, and expenses, cost of production are what they are. Interest rates is a big one. I think when interest rates are where they are, what's your motivation to expand? I mean, that's a key component. I mean, I think you have to have motivated producers that want to expand. And right now, there's not, other than extreme high prices. And if they were just absolutely as greedy as could be, like everybody thinks everybody in the beef supply chain is, then they would expand automatically. But I don't think that's the case. I mean, ranchers, we're a very passionate people. We love what we do. It's a lifestyle piece, right? Being able to cash flow the ranch, make it profitable, and turn it over to the next generation is kind of always at the forefront of what we focus on. So if we're in a position where we're making good cash flow, generating good revenue, and not having to buck headwinds, like we're going to expand, but then I got to try to find more units of labor, and we're going to try to expand under interest rates that are 5 or 6 basis points higher than the last time we went through this, then I think those decisions kind of become up in the air and unclear, and maybe not as palatable. I think the risk appetites aren't very good right now. And in the lending space, somebody's going to lend them the money to do that. And when they're having conversations about that very thing, how much risk they feel like taking on, it's like, it's going to cost you 6% plus minus that to borrow to pay for $4,000 bred heifers. And I think there's still the memory of how fast we fell off a cliff back in 14, 15, the last time this thing peaked. So to me, those factors are just kind of hanging out there, and nobody's really that motivated. Yeah. I think they're feeling pretty comfortable from a risk standpoint of where they're at. At some point, yes, I think we will hit that expansion mode. Couple things. Yes, the dairy space, it is a absolute black hole of we don't know what we don't know. That could be a new paradigm shift coming to the industry. And they're a juggernaut as far as being able to expand quickly. And I think you could spend an entire episode, just absolutely entire episode, talking about beef dairy and what that looks like, and dairy expansion that's happening today, and what impact that can have on the industry as a whole from supply standpoint. The one thing I do think is interesting, and this is something that the dairy space has really gotten, they've always been the point of integration for technology first for the most part. And a lot of those technologies then pass down, right? They flow back to the beef and the ranching space. When we do get into that expansion mode, we AI, 90% of dairy cows in North America, maybe higher than that. We only AI 6 to 7% of beef cows. However, is there an opportunity to expand at a much faster pace than we've ever expanded before, now that sexed female semen is a common tool? It's been out, it's been proven. Once heifer retention starts, if you use heifer sex semen, can we speed up the expansion process faster? Does that change people's motivation, change how we rebuild the cow herd? I don't know. Again, we don't AI that many cows, but can we increase the heifer population from 50% in this country to 53%? And that extra 3% is all retained heifers, et cetera. So I don't know. I mean, those are questions we have no answers to, but it makes you think.
Yeah. And as you talk about that, in fact, I'm working on a show. It's something I had talked about a while back with a guy that I'm hoping to have on in this coming week. And that is, what kind of dollars are we as producers leaving on the table? And I realize, sex semen AIing, there's a cost to that, and you got to put that into perspective on all that. But from a commercial standpoint, which is a majority of our cow herd in the country, not utilizing a sex semen, half these are steers, half these are heifers. And, we're ending up selling some of these heifers because they're not replacement quality, when we could just be using a sex semen to get the amount of replacements that we need, and then putting that back into, a terminal bull that's going to put pounds on the ones that we are going to sell. That to me is something, you talk about the sex semen, it's a little bit different vein of conversation than what you had talked about, but it does get back to that technology and utilizing that. We're seeing that in the dairy industry, not so much in the beef industry.
Yeah, I think it's kind of something I've ruminated on. I like that word, so I'm gonna totally steal it from you. Ruminated on for several years now, because I've spent so much time in that space, and they are available, and there is some adoption and integration of it, but it's just some of these large ranches that are the ones that control large populations of cattle, where it really makes sense to leverage that technology. It is, from a labor and a logistics standpoint, and like how your system's put together, it's so difficult to do mass AI like that. And I think the labor is a big piece of it. I mean, you look at and I'm probably going to get this percentage wrong, but you look at South America, and they are, I think, somewhere in the 30% of the cow herds AI'd. I could be a little high. I could be off. So forgive me if I am. But they have just tremendous amounts of cheap labor. Mm-hmm. So gathering cattle and being able to facilitate a system like that is much easier there, where we don't have that. So I think there's a big differentiator that shows why maybe it hadn't happened. And of course, in the dairy space, it's just an absolute no-brainer. Those cows are in the parlor and in the barn every day, and it's a no-brainer. And another factor, and this is something that I was not aware of until I actually had just a conversation with a close friend the other day that's still actively in that AI company space. And it sounds like, it's like with large animal vets, they're hard. It's getting harder and harder all the time to find large animal vets and get more of them to come back into large animal practices versus going into small animal practices. And so we're in a real shortage. It sounds like we could be heading into an armed service shortage in the ranching space. And I don't know what that looks like as far as the statistics, but it was just a conversation that was had, and she kind of threw that out there, and it would make sense, right? If we're struggling with large animal vets, then getting people that really feel that they can create a living and want to work in the space where we don't AI a lot of cows, but there is a need for it. And if we're getting into a point where there's going to be a shortage of really good artificial insemination technicians to help some of these guys expand the beef herd. That's another wild card that I'd throw out there, and maybe it's an upcoming opportunity. If you're a young person and your timing's right, perhaps it's time to start thinking about, hey, when expansion does happen, there might be an opportunity for me to actually grow a business and get a foothold, because there isn't a lot of competition, maybe, or there's less competition every year than there usually is because you've got retirements and you're just not replacing the armed service at the same rate that we used to. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, interesting there to think about. And it's also that ties really closely to just our culture, society as a whole, in the fact of just seeing that some of the need in our industry for hands-on labor that can't be replaced with AI. And when I say AI there, I'm talking technology AI. I'm not talking about artificial insemination. So that's an interesting, because I think there's a combination there. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I do want to talk about the tech element of ranching, because I know that's an area you also have a really good grasp of. And I don't want to talk about just the things we all know about or we've all been talking about, but what are some things we're not thinking or not hearing so much about in the technology side of the ranching and precision agriculture that all comes into play in all of this? I want to do that when we come back, okay? In a world of variables that are beyond our control, there's a tool that can provide certainty for your breeding program. I'm talking about Igenity Beef. It's the first genomic profile designed for crossbred commercial cattle. Now, here's a tool that's going to utilize DNA to rank the genetic merit for 17 key traits, from maternal to performance to carcass traits, as well as mitigate risk factors, for example, like congestive heart failure. It's time to take the gamble and the waiting game out of your breeding program. Make accurate decisions with confidence and uncover your herd's potential with Igenity Beef. To learn more, contact your Neogen representative today or visit neogen.com/Igenity-beef. Folks, my guest today is Jared Wareham, and he is a beef industry and ag tech consultant, also ranches in southern Colorado. You also kind of like doing a little horse work, so I know you kind of understanding in that industry as well. But when we get into ag technology, I think in this last year, the big term was AI, and I'm meaning artificial intelligence. Okay, good. We're good there. We understand that. We've talked about that. We're flushing a little bit of that out. Let's go a little bit beyond that. I mean, it's not that we can't talk about that here today and talk about where that's going and maybe dispel some of the myths about that. And maybe we start there, and then as I hear that conversation, it might lead me to some more questions. So let's start there.
Yeah, artificial intelligence, I think, is again, that's just like that beef dairy conversation. You could spend an entire episode just diving into everything that's coming from that space. And I'm, I don't want the listeners of Working Ranch Radio coming back in 20 years and replaying this episode and telling me, that you were wrong. But I feel very strongly that we're not going to be taken over by robots into the future, as far as being, our civilization is going to be attacked and taken over by robots. I think we're pretty safe with that. But I think the one big thing, and I'll mention it and then we'll move on to some other things, but I feel there is a lack of understanding of how artificial intelligence really works. And when it is when all the ingredients are there to bake the right cake, you cannot beat what artificial intelligence can deliver. And we can kind of move on from that, but I do think it's going to impact our industry in a very transformative way over the next decade. It already has. I'm aware of some of the things that I work. So to your point, I spend a good part of my time working with ag tech startup companies because it's a passion of mine. I spent a lot of years in startup businesses as I worked my way up in the industry to where I am now. And I love coaching. I like helping new CEOs really learn how to be a CEO. In the ag tech space, to me, is something that's got a lot of opportunity to make inroads and help ranchers and dairymen and people that are involved in agriculture have that opportunity to pass that family operation down, right? We want to be able to say sustainable economically so that we can have continue that multi-generational footprint in the industry. And so I think there's a lot of technologies that are going to help with that. And so that's why I love sitting at that space. So it's kind of like I sit at the intersection of our industry and technology. And some of that technology comes from some brilliant people right here in, middle America. But I do think artificial intelligence is pretty special, but it does have to have those ingredients to be implemented correctly. I do some other things that I think are on the horizon, and they're really coming quickly in some areas. It's always been pointed. I mean, animal health has always been a massive issue, right? Yeah. We just struggle we want to make sure we keep our animals healthy from a humane standpoint, right? It's our lifeblood. We have to keep our animals healthy because that is our paycheck, and we want to keep them growing. And some of the stuff out there that is going to be more predictive and help give us maybe 24 to 48 hours notice on illness or the onset of an outbreak in a pen of cattle or a pen of calves we just weaned, I think are the things that are very interesting. There's some biometric wearables. I mean, look what Halter did, but I think it's an interesting technology. So I think wearables are a thing. And there's a cost benefit analysis piece that we sometimes don't always get right from a tech standpoint, truly understanding what the return on investment is at the ranch level or the dairy or the feedlot space. And feedlot specifically, because there's always a lot of stuff pointed at the feed yard space, but there are some people doing some pretty cool things, bringing some technology from the human medical side of the industry into the beef space, as far as some biometric detections and some wearables that are very low cost and fit into workflows that I think are really interesting, and we should keep our eyes and ears out for those. And they're removable. You can clip them on the back of an ear tag, and that animal, if biometric issues arise, you typically are going to see that issue before you're going to see a behavior problem, right? So that makes sense. The other thing I think is a deep abyss that we should keep our eyes out for, because there is stuff being looked at here and worked on, is being able to understand and grade bovine hearts as they're coming in and out of the feed yard, because there's a lot of inefficiency from animals with compromised lungs and hearts that you can't look at the animal and tell it, and you will never know unless you do a post-op biopsy, right? So if we can get an idea of what that heart and lung condition is upon entry and do so at speed with a grading system where they can be sorted and ranked and managed accordingly, then that's interesting. I think that's really actually achievable, and it might take some time, but it's doable.
I think that's an interesting thing, Jared. As you talk about that from the feedlot side, I think, okay, how does that, let's bring that down to the rancher level. Myself, commercial ranch outfit. That's one of the things, as I just finished up weaning and having a discussion with my nephew who works for me, we're talking, how do we get the death loss less? As you talked about there, that ability to identify some of these animals' heart, lungs, which are the two main things right there, and some of these wearables, that's from the rancher standpoint, that's going to impact us the most, I think.
I agree, and I think we'll go through a stage where we'll be kind of explosion will happen in the wearable space, and then we'll sort down to the ones that really get it right, the good companies that get it right. But I do believe we are into that paradigm shift where wearables are a thing. It makes sense there, but it's got to fit. It's got to fit the industry. They've got to last. They've got to work into workflows, both on the ranch and the feed yard, et cetera. When I look at Halter, the one thing that to me makes them so successful, and their runway or their path ahead of them to integration open is they replace what is now going to be obsolete infrastructure, which is fencing, especially in the forest. When you got to run up at 10,000, 9,000 feet and the elk destroy the fence all over the place. And then you got to go back every summer and fix it, and the labor and the cost and the lost hours. You can justify using a product like Halter that it will put up a permanent, in theory, right? Mm-hmm. It'll put that permanent fence back up, and those cattle wearing those halters, will get buzzed if they try to cross it. And on top of that, you get real-time data where the cows are. You get real-time data about behavior information, and you can begin to train those cows to come down out of the forest at a certain time. It's fascinating what can be done. And then when you look at what could happen when they finally achieve artificial intelligence, like insights, because it takes data to get artificial intelligence really to be a productive thing for you. But when that happens for a company or a product, or some other kind of biometric wearable or wearable in general, is then you get that optimization of how to use it. You get the predictive, you become predictive, and you're on the front edge of making decisions instead of being reactive. And that's where we've always struggled to be in our industry, is being more reactive, because we don't know when something's going to happen, because we don't have things out there benchmarking and red flagging. Hey, this is an animal that may get sick, or these animals are moving out of this space faster. What's going on up there? Having the ability to manage all that from afar doesn't mean you don't want to put eyes on them. But if you have indicators that say, hey, this set of cows is getting additional days of grazing in this part of the forest or this part of the ranch they've never gotten before, perhaps we've got more forage, perhaps than we thought we did, and we can change our management. Perhaps we're going to sell, or our delivery dates that we sold them under need to be adjusted, which then maybe we need to adjust if we have a risk instrument that we purchased to hedge those calves, we need to adjust that. So it makes you so much more precise with those decisions as a manager. So I can see the sky's the limit on where we go from here, if the products are durable and work and last.
And one more thing, the ROI is there.
Yep, 100%.
That's
100%.
We're getting there. We're there for some folks, definitely on some of this stuff, definitely more so than we were 3, 4, 5 years ago. I think it needs to get better personally, but that's me. Okay. Real quick, just a real quick clarification. And we've had folks on here talking about Halter. Just from a clarification standpoint, virtual fencing, is that more of a general term, or are you specific to Halter?
Yeah. And I don't know those guys at all. I'm just aware of them.
Yeah.
And there's a handful of people in that market. I'm just familiar enough with them because I've seen it work in New Zealand and was fascinated. I was like the giant kid at a candy shop, just totally geeking out watching a dairy. She had her iPad and she was controlling. She wanted to bring the cows to the parlor, and she just showed me, and it was fascinating how it works. So I kind of have been a little bit of a nerd studying that and then watching what's happened with that specific company. But there's multiple companies in that space. I think that's just that is an interesting technology, because it's not, hey, here's something cool and you should try it and maybe it has no ROI. It actually, the ROI piece has helped because it's replacing infrastructure that we would have to put back up, right? Mm-hmm. If the virtual fence component wasn't really a thing and you didn't have to, and I think that's, you're trading one investment into actual, fence post, wire, whatever it is, and you're trading that for another product that is achieving the same thing plus all these other things that go with it.
Yeah.
That's the interesting piece. So
okay, let's take another break here. We got one more segment to do, and when we do that, I want to just tie all of this together. And as we look ahead as ranchers into 2026, just what do we do? I mean, we've shared this information, but how do we position ourselves to get the most out of 2026 with the information that we have here today? So I want to get into that when we come back.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone calf catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone calf catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
Okay, Jared, as we wrap up our conversation here, we've talked a lot of different things about our industry as we look ahead into 2026. And I just want to wrap this all up and having a conversation. Myself as a rancher, you're talking to a lot of ranchers out there. I know there's other folks that represent other parts of the industry, but at the same time, directed towards, the rancher. What, just to wrap all of this up, 2 to 3 things that you would say, okay, focus on this. Think about this, not necessarily for short-term gain, short-term profitability, but long-term profitability. Go.
I think cost of capital is key right now. I mean, operating expenses are, they're really not softening. I mean, some in some areas, but not much. So cost of capital is going to be huge. So interest rates, really watch those. If there's an opportunity to take advantage of a rate cut or a potential drop of a basis points or two, I think you really, really, really have to take a long, hard look at that and stay on the muscle with regards to that. If you actively practice risk management in cattle, I know I've got a good friend who has a lot less hair. He's practically bald now, and I think most of it was because of this summer and the amount of money he had to pay out in margin calls. He knows exactly who I'm talking about because I told him I was going to be on here, so I want to make sure I share this with him. But yeah, I mean, it's so volatile right now. So how to really practice good risk management? There has to be a partnership with the right people, and we don't know what's going to happen. So do not turn a blind eye to that one. And then who knows what's going to happen with weather. So plan ahead. And the other things are somewhat in your control, but somewhat out of your control. I think coming up with a marketing plan. Are you forward contracting? Are you going to sell on the spot market? When are you going to do that? Are you going to wean? Are you going to not wean? Are you going to do programs? What can you do to add value with the minimal amount of input? And I don't want to say minimal like I'm a minimalist and you got to do as little as possible. But I mean, when you look at the value creation that you want to have an impact for your calf crop, what can I do that calf crop is maximized in value, but I've optimized my amount of inputs that I put in them. So to me, it's a lot of financial based pieces. Because again, I think keeping yourself sustainable economically is key first, and keeping that thing either maintained at a present size and scope of an operation so that you can weather whatever storm could be coming, or if you see an opportunity to expand, then you're on the muscle and you're ready to do it because you've been watching those things. And man, we're going to grow the ranch, and I'm going to be able to bring a kid back and add a position within the family, and that's important. So I think those are the things that I would keep me up at night.
Yeah. That's a good way to go. And I think to start to, fundamentally what goes all back to that. And I've had several folks on my show. I know you would reiterate the same thing, is that is really understanding our financial books, enterprise gross margins, the profitability of those gross margins, our overheads, and getting real good grasp of that, because that's then what helps, as you had said, it's about planning. It's about looking ahead and putting that stuff into place and not having to react at the last minute. So I think that's some good advice in there. Okay. One of the things, as I said, I kind of gave you forewarning before we went into this segment. What are you listening to? What are you reading that's helping you grow in your work and your business? What are those things?
All right, I'll try to be quick on this, but I've got 2, and one's more. So I read 2 types of books. I do professional development stuff to make myself better, and then I love our industry and I love history, so I do a lot of personal reading in that space. But in the what's making me better category, the best book I've read this year would have to be 10X is Easier than 2X.
Okay.
Highly recommend that book. It helps frame. I think it does a really good job helping you understand. And I think a lot of ranchers that would be in my age frame, even older, I'm mid 40s. And so there's 10 plus years, and even some younger people could probably get some value out of it. But it does a great job helping you understand mentally what is possible from like your point you made about enterprise risk management and looking at the ranching operation. What are we doing today that's 2x and it's a sluggish return on our investment? And what could we do tomorrow that's 10xing? That is exponentially more valuable to this operation if we consider doing what. And so I read that book. Okay. And of course, whatever that is on your enterprise, you'll have to determine that. But I think it'll help set the frame of mind you need to immerse yourself. And some of the things we don't do, and I will tell you this is just somebody who's run a lot of businesses and now running my own, is when you have that CEO hat on as the manager, you have to spend time working on the business and working in the business. And there is a big difference. Working in the business means you're managing employees and you're doing the day-to-day stuff. Working on the business means, what does my business look like today? What is my business going to look like in 5 years, 10 years? How do I change the structure, the system that we work in so that it is prepared for the longevity into the future? Things like that. Mm-hmm. And so I think you have to make time for yourself as often as possible, whether you're sitting in the tractor baling hay with auto steer on, listening to a podcast or whatever, for professional development in that space so you can understand how to better run an enterprise, how to work on the business and how to work in the business. The other book, real quick, from a personal standpoint, I kind of went on a tear on reading books about Texas Rangers. And that was a great one. I enjoyed that. But the one I read the last year that I loved was called Cattle Kingdom, The Untold Story or History of the Cowboy West. It's only about 5 or 6 years old. It's not very old, but it's a tremendous book that kind of takes you on a great journey back into the post-Civil War through 1890 period when the cow herds boomed and foreign capital by the millions from the UK, from places in Europe, from Scotland poured into this country. It's a great book. If you love history and you love the cattle industry, that's a good one.
Very good.
The spring up of the cattle towns and all the railroad, Gustavus Swift, the Packers, how all that happened in that 3 decades of time. There's a lot of history that has influenced our industry that you'll enjoy. It's pretty good reading. So I'd check that one out.
Good. All right. Well, Jared, good to visit with you here today on the program. I look forward to more conversations as you and I talked about, but thanks for being here today on the program.
You bet. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. And again, our guest joining us on the program here today was Jared Wareham. He is a beef industry and ag tech consultant. He and his family live in southern Colorado. And if you do want to get a hold of Jared, I will put a link on our show description under his name there to his LinkedIn account. If you want to get a hold of him, you can do it from that standpoint. If you have any questions, then please feel free to reach out to Jared. Or if you have questions, don't be afraid to send me a text or an email as well. My email address is justin.workingranch@gmail.com. We'll be back after this.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Today's Long Range Weather brought to you by Long Range Epinephrine, your extended release dewormer delivering up to 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. Long Range gaining 23 more pounds per head compared to those treated with generic ivermectin when it comes to looking at what you're going to be treating your yearlings with and looking at this coming year. something to think about. Long-range epinephrine. To find out more, go to their website at longrangedewormer.com. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long-range weather, joining us is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as we get started with this new year, it's interesting. Folks have really been enjoying, for the most part, a pretty mild weather through the holiday season. Definitely some storms here and there, hit or miss. But as we look ahead into this coming week that's out there, 7 to 10 days out, there's something that's pretty unique in the fact that we've got a really massive high that's sitting in the northern Pacific. And so what I want to know about that is, what does that spell out? And I know there's a lot of not necessarily knowing exactly how that's going to unfold, but what's the precedence of that?
Well, it's really interesting pattern in the sense that we've seen a lot of things that have been off the charts in the Pacific this winter season so far. First was this major blocking pattern where we had a big high, very stubborn high up into the Aleutians in the Bering Sea that stood there for weeks and really was a big impact factor for a lot of the western and central United States to be so mild and dry, that at the same time bringing huge amounts of precipitation to California and parts of the desert Southwest. Now that pattern has broken down, so that high is gone. It's a new high we're talking about that is forming along the west coast of the U.S., going up into the Gulf of Alaska and into western areas of Canada. So we have another high, and it's another very strong one, but it's in a different part of the Pacific. And so we're going through a readjustment phase to where, with this new high in a new location, we're going to see over the next 7 to 10 days lots of up and downs across the U.S. We're going to see pushes of Pacific air that will bring mild temperatures, but with this high building into the Gulf of Alaska, there will be some displacement of Canadian air, especially into the Midwest and even getting into the southeastern parts of the United States. There's going to be a couple of opportunities for freezing temperatures to get into the deep south, but things are going to be moving, meaning nothing's going to really terribly stick for more than a couple of days or so until we see what the lifespan of this big high pressure ridge is along the West Coast. It will also turn off this high pressure ridge. All of the wet weather California has seen, they're going to go to a dry pattern now from the Pacific Northwest to California into the southwestern United States. So there's going to be a lot of variability, some up and downs, an active weather pattern. But for the next 2 weeks, we don't see one particular pattern locking into place.
Yeah. Okay, so with that in mind, as you look ahead, and one of the things folks always ask me, like, well, what's Don telling you? And so I'm gonna go back to a little bit of what we talked about the last time we did a weather segment, and that was things are kind of shaping up to what I think what we talked about then was the year of 10 and 11 and 13 and 14. And does that still relate? Is that still kind of what you're telling folks?
It is. Now, a lot of that has to do with our seasonal forecasting tools that are suggesting that after we go through the next, let's say, 10 to 14 days or so, that Pacific high along the West Coast will migrate a little bit further west. And as that happens, that will help another reloading of Canadian air to rebuild in the higher latitudes that will likely have an opportunity to come into the lower 48 as we get into that last week of January. And those analog years you talked about, 2013, 14, 2010, 11, those Februaries were quite cold. And there's some hints that is on the table, at least some of our seasonal modeling tools that can look out that far are suggesting that those analog years could be a good representation of what's coming for late January and February.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of gives us some idea to look ahead. Appreciate the update, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week.
We'll see you then.
You bet. And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. If you want to tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast, you can find him at his website, dayweather.com. You can find a link there to his YouTube channel. Today's long-range weather brought to you by long-range epinephrine with 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. To find out more, their website is longrangedewormer.com. Are we leaving money on the table in our breeding program. That's coming up on next week's show, so tune in. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us on this week's show. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.